Hello, everybody. This is episode 10 of Existential, and today we talk about the thrill of conspiracies. But I want to apologize, I'm a little bit under the weather, so hopefully you don't really hear it too much in my voice. But before we continue, I want to give a brief thanks to our sponsor. Alright, so we're back. Pretty interesting idea. I'm no conspiracy theorist by myself, but I wanted to talk about the thrill of conspiracies, right? I have friends who are conspiracy theorists, to whatever extent they are, but I wanted to talk about why I'm not too into it, right? And it seems as though just looking interpersonally, right, something I would be personally into. Before I deliver my point, I want to mention two different lenses, right? I like looking at history in two different ways, right? I like looking at history with two different elements. Number one, there is the textbook way, right? That's number one, textbook. Now, this is all the glory, the happiness, the victories, right? The winning of the war, but very, very bullet point type view of it, right? Oh, they went to two people went to war, one of them won. That's documented in history books, right? But then there is the second part of conspiracies, or the second part of history, which I like looking at, which is the interpersonal type, right? There's an interpersonal view of history and clothing, weather, the technical details, right? What kind of armor were they wearing? If they're wearing a bunch of metal, that must have been really hot. I wonder what kind of weather they were in, right? What if it rained that day? You only see, and a lot of people's images come from when they're asked to conjure up an image of what, like, the Spartans look like or what a war would look like. Sometimes they can't even picture. You can picture an 1800s war, but you can't really picture a war from the 1300s, right? It's very difficult. So people really just try to reference movie magic or just movie highlights, right? And they kind of see only the big highlights, but like what happens for rains, like what happens there. It'd be kind of funny, right? The only way you'd kind of see, oh, it rained, if they're trying to do like a funny skit inside a movie, right? If let's say two of the top generals of the entire army are in a tent talking, right? And then some wind comes and it blows down the pitcher of water, right? And then both generals look and they're just kind of giggling almost, right? I mean, that's like that must have happened at some point in history. But the only way you would actually see that is if it was in a context that they're trying to make a joke. Like, oh, the only reason this fell was because someone must have pushed it. Now the generals are going to go out to war. This was provoking us to go to war, right? You only see the highlights, but these small, tiny technical details did actually happen, right? And I'm not talking about just the physical technical. I'm talking about the emotional details, right? What kind of mood was he in that day? Was he ready? Were they ready to fight, right? All these small details. And this is not just about war. This is about presidencies, right? This is about everything. This is about world leaders. This is about everything, right? And so my point is going to be argued through the interpersonal lens of history. So emotions, number one, right? My argument is that emotions, just understanding and acceptance of human nature removes the thrill, not the interest, but the thrill of conspiracy theories. So I like thinking of conspiracy theories in two ways as well. Number one is through thrill, and another through interest. So interest. Interest through conspiracy theories is interesting because it is contradictory to popular belief, right? There is a popular belief that we are all trained in some way to believe, right? There's a common way to do things, and we all subscribe to this common way, right? That's what creates ethics in a society. Now, contradicting popular belief, right? The opposite always right builds it. As soon as you build a rule, the opposite always becomes a thing of taboo, right? It always becomes a very maybe I shouldn't, maybe I should, right? It always becomes something of interest, right? So when you have an ethic or an idea that's contradictory to popular belief, that in and of itself becomes something interesting, which relates to the thrill. But another point is that there is a certain consolation and a certain satisfaction and happiness, if you will, when you find a clue to a case. If you're in a police case and you're simply just studying the case and all, you think you have the whole case under control, then there is another piece of evidence that you haven't factored in, right? There's a very specific feeling about finding a foreign piece of evidence. Huh? Wait, there's a third person here, right? There's a very specific, almost kind of enjoyable thrill uh, about finding a third piece of evidence, right? So when you kind of contradict, right, there builds a taboo around it, and the reason the conspiracy, and it's always, remember, it's always a balance. So when the rule of society is, or when a certain belief in society is so strong, it becomes equally strong and equally thrilling when you have a contradicting belief to popular belief, right? So if the JFK shooting, if the JFK shooting was a super strong belief in American society, right, which it is, having the opposite is going to be equally as strong, right? Having it's going to have equal magnitude of thrill, because of it's such a deeply ingrained idea in America. So for instance, anything else, right? Going back to the root idea here. uh when let's say the belief is, the confidence in the belief in society is 100, like JFK, right? The excitement and the thrill of finding evidence that it is not, right? Disproving an entire society, right? All that excitement is going to feel like 100, right? So that's really what draws people into conspiracies. But before we continue, I want to give a brief thanks to our sponsor. All right, so we're back. Now I want to focus on the thrill of conspiracies, right? The thrill is having intimate knowledge of a belief, or of an established belief that no one else has, right? That's where the thrill and excitement come from. So I look at conspiracy theories and I kind of say to myself that it's interesting, right? That's kind of the reaction. It's interesting. It's really captivating, but the thrill is not there, because I understand human. I mean, if you understand human, I'm not claiming that I understand human nature even in the slightest, but you know, there is an element to, I understand that people lie. It's a simple belief, but it's just, that's the reality. Unworked or untouched human belief or human nature means you just lie, and that's an unfortunate part of reality, right? It's a gift. Don't get me wrong, it is a gift that, if we were born with perfect beliefs, then what's there to work on, right? Then what's the glory in being a good person? What's the goal, or not the satisfaction, but what is the reason to be a good person if we all are perfect? The brain even gets bored when there's no stimuli attracting it, right? That's a theory behind why, if you look at a mirror in a pretty dark room for 10 minutes straight, you'll start hallucinating, because of a lack of stimuli. Your mind constantly needs to be distracted. Not distracted, but needs to be engaged in something. And if you're not engaged in something, then your mind just becomes bored, right? So there's a constant biological need to be engaged in something, constant need to work. So anyway, understanding human nature, understanding why people do it. There's no glory in it. There's just not glory, but there's no interest. There's no thrill. There is interest. It is interesting to see that an entire society believes that the JFK shooting, right? But there are a few people who don't, right? And there is people who don't believe it, bring circumstantial or even concrete evidence that they believe proves that he was not indeed, that it did not go or it was malicious, or whatever the belief may be, right? There is an interest to disproving 320 million Americans and what they believe. There is a very, very, very deep interest there, but the thrill to suggest that there is no thrill, that there is a thrill to finding it, that the excitement is there, like, they actually lied? What? They lied to 320 million people? That's crazy. That brings excitement. That's crazy. That's really captivating. But once you understand human nature, just to a very simple extent, that people do actually lie, and they would go so far as to lie to 320 million people, right? That is not, it's not a very deep idea. It's just the thrill becomes a very foreign foreign factor into conspiracies, right? Because when you boil it down, it's just an expression of human nature. The thrill comes from knowing something contradictory to popular belief and finding out it's a lie, and that's the wow effect, right? That's the wow factor. And I find that just understanding that it's untouched and unadulterated human nature at work, right, cheapens the conspiracy to just an acceptable story, right? You just accept the reality. You accept the fact that that's human nature, and that's how people operate. There is an overwhelming. I mean, it's this idea just when I kind of discovered it with myself, right? It's one of those things that you just can't get out of your head. It's not a very captivating thing for me anymore. But that does not mean that it's completely invalid. Of course not. There are people who I currently have a teacher who's obsessed with conspiracy theories, and I can listen to him for hours on end debating and talking about it, right? But just for me personally, it's a very outside external thing, because I understand people lie. Politicians are known to lie. The higher the integrity, the more shocking it is, of course. But once you understand that there is no root integrity and to anything anyone says, for the most part, especially in today's age, then there's not really any expectation for truth. And because there's no expectation for truth, there's no thrill in finding out they lied. So with that, we are going to close. So thank you very, very much for listening. All your support helps. Share this podcast with all your friends and family. Be sure to tune in daily for new episodes of Existential.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.